Okay, I appreciate you coming and talking to me this morning. First of all, we're going to start. I want to know where you were born and your parents' names and some of your family history.
Okay, I was born in Florida, right 3 miles inside Florida, almost on the Alabama line. So, Daddy's name was Jerome Owen, and he was raised in that area, and my mother was raised about near Milton, Florida. And I'm one of 12, and I went to school there and then came to work at Pensacola Naval Air Station and worked there until I was drafted.
What was your mother's name, full name?
Vesta Jones Owen, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and where in the pecking order of 12 brothers and sisters are you?
I'm down toward the last, about 4 from the bottom.
Okay. Okay, and what did your father do?
Farmer.
He was a farmer, okay.
Right.
And did you graduate from that, in that area?
Yeah, I graduated from high school at Leonard High School near Defuniak Springs.
Okay. I forgot to ask you, what is your birthday?
January the 9th, 1925.
Okay. And so you graduated in what year?
1942.
1942. And, okay, tell me from 1942, working at the base, and then getting drafted. Kind of just right after high school history.
Well, right after I got out of high school in May, and then I went to work at Naval Air Station, Civil Service, in June of 42. And worked there until birthday in January, so I was registered for the draft, and in April then I was drafted. So I went into Camp Blanding, Florida, was inducted there, and then went from there to Fort Knox, Kentucky for armored infantry training.
Okay. Who was your captain? Do you remember who your first captain was there in Campbell?
No, I was not at Campbell.
I mean, Fort Knox.
No, I can't remember the name of the.
That's okay.
But we was only there about 4 months.
Oh, okay. Tell me about your impression when you first went there. Kind of how you felt about it. Was it what you expected?
Well, I had other brothers in the service already, and I knew it was my duty to go, but I didn't volunteer. But I accepted it as being the thing to do at the time, and it was rough training, but we managed through it.
Was it the physical training of it, or was it the mental part of it, or was just all of the training situation?
There was a lot of physical training. So with armored infantry, we had training in regular infantry training, plus we had it in the small tanks and the medium tanks that was used in the war.
Okay. Tell me about the vehicles that you trained on.
Well, we had the half-track and a Jeep, of course, smaller, and then the small tank, which is had 37 millimeter on it. And then we went from there. We took training in the A4 tank. It's 75 millimeter tank. Munitions on it. So, and we took training in it as a driver, assistant driver, and a loader, and a tank commander. We took training in all phases of it.
When you got into the tank, describe what it was like. Like, if I've never been inside of a tank, can you describe what it looked like if you were the driver? Let's put you in the driver's seat.
Well, they called it iron coffin. Because if you were ever hit, that was it. But it was not mechanized like as much as they have now. and the loading, where you load the ammunition, it was all by hand, and no computers back then, and it's close quarters. And we, like we said, we went ahead and took the training in for the loading of the gun and also for the tank commander.
If you were loading the gun, how far could you touch the driver, or how far would you be away from that driver?
No, it was in a different compartment, because the driver, you had to go outside the tank in order to get to the driver and assistant driver. They were in front of the turret.
Okay. Nobody's ever explained that to me. So tell me where the gunner and the loader were in a compartment in the which side?
On the
if you're the driver, where is everybody located in the tank and compartments?
They're in the back of you, back. And if I remember correctly, I was on the left side for the loading of the ammunition, and the tank commander would be on the right side. So.
Now you had, did you have the gunner? Did you have, how many guns were on these? Just one?
Just the one.
Just the one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you have anybody that used a machine gun or anything in that tank?
Later on, some of them probably had machine guns on, 50 caliber, I think.
If you had a favorite of all those things you trained on, would there be a favorite that you enjoyed using, working, that you felt more comfortable with?
In the tank?
Uh-huh. One of the vehicles, whether it was the tank or the Jeep or the half-track or...
I guess the tank would be probably more favorable, but because you felt safer in that, even though it was, than you would be in the half-track. Even though it had small armor, it was on part of it. It was still not as well protected for small arm fire anyway.
Okay, get me from training up to Camp Barkley.
Well, after we left out of our basic training at Fort Knox, we went into what they call battle training, which was 3 or 4 weeks there we had, and then we went from there into Tennessee maneuvers. And we had real rough, the battle training we had before we went into the maneuvers was real, it was rough.
Tell me about it.
Well, they had simulated where they had, we had night maneuvers and all, where because I remember driving a Jeep one night, and I had assistant commander on our captain, and we going along the road. We had night, just a little lights, night lights on the Jeeps, and I was across the bridge before I knew I'd even. And next day, well, I could see what I missed if we had gone. If we hadn't made it across.
What was it? A deep ravine or something?
Yeah.
How did they, the night lights, did they cover, how did they do the night lights?
Oh, they were only a small little, about like so, right in the front, that you could, didn't put out much light.
So how far could you see? Just, kind of explain, how far could you see with night lights?
I don't remember how far, but it wasn't, you could tell by the road you was in the road, but I mean, you couldn't tell where you was in the right or left side or what, but you could see them vehicle ahead, if they were approaching pretty well, but I don't remember the distance.
Well, what is your most vivid memory of the war maneuvers that you did, this Tennessee war maneuvers? Is there one thing that kind of stands out in your mind?
Well, I know when we slept on a lot of cedar boughs we used to keep off the ground when we were at night and sleeping on that there Lebanon, around Nashville area.
And what time of year was this?
Let's see, it was in the fall and early winter.
What was the weather like during that time? Do you remember?
It wasn't too cold, but it was cool enough you needed a little cover, I remember it being a rocky area, and we'd have to put up a tent or something. You could hardly get a stake down. There were so many rocks in that area.
Now, when you got to the maneuvers, had you settled on one piece of equipment, or was that a continual moving and experience on all the vehicles?
No, it was settled down more or less on a company level where we'd be able to each one have a certain job to do. I mean, rather than being going from one vehicle to the other and all, it was you was more or less assigned to a vehicle or a section and so forth. And I was driver of a Jeep, so.
So was that okay?
Okay.
When the drivers of the Jeeps, who did y'all transport if you were a Jeep driver?
Well, it's different ones, but I had the assistant battery commander, or if they need to have someone else that needed transportation.
Was there one person that the assistant battery commander? Who was that? Who was? Do you have any impressions? His name and your impressions of him?
I don't remember the name, so it's
By that time, had the commanders and had they kind of settled down, and who was going to hold what positions, and the generals and the majors, or were they still kind of moving around and not settled?
They were moving around, not settled, because until I got to Camp Barkley, then I was assigned to the as a company clerk in the orderly room of the headquarters battery. Because I had experience in clerical experience, so before I went in, so I guess that's the reason it picked me. I don't know.
So tell me about getting from Tennessee to Camp Barkley and your impressions of Camp Barkley.
Well, it's a long ride from Tennessee by rail, and we after we got there, we were in these temporary barracks, and I remember going out and from there into the bivouacking out the maneuvers before we went overseas, out in the sagebrush or mesquite trees and all. So, and it was dry and dusty, and that's about. And just anticipating when we had to go, all kind of rumors when we would be leaving and so forth.
Explain to me the job of headquarters at Camp Barkley. Now, you didn't live in the Hutments?
Yes, I lived in the...
You did live in the Hutments, okay. Then explain...
Oh, it's temporary barracks, but it was, what I say temporary, it was plywood, thin plywood. It was a... but it was dry and dusty, even there, so... We had a dry summer that summer, so...
Like we had this year. Okay, now tell me about what the headquarters unit. I have not talked to many people in the headquarters, so we need you to put on this tape kind of what the general job of headquarters at Barkley was, and I'm sure it kind of stayed the same through the war, but
right.
Tell us what exactly headquarters did.
Well, we had individual records of each and every individual, and it gave their home address and their next, beneficiary, next of kin, and their score they made for. But most of those in our particular outfit were ASTP students, and they were from all over, but a lot of them from the Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, New Jersey, in that area. And of course their scores were real high because they had already, some of them already been in college maybe a year or 2 years, some of them 6 months, but they were real. We had a smart group of in our particular section we was in. And some of them came from Abilene, not Abilene, came from schools here in Texas too, quite a few of them. But we kept all those records, and then if the immunization, when they'd have their tetanus shot or smallpox and vaccines and all that, and just kept a history of what happened to them if they have to go on sick call, and kept with all the correspondence that we needed to. There was incoming and also anything that needed to be transmitted, go out. And I stayed that way all during the war.
On the correspondence, were the censors and all that, was that a part of the headquarters?
The what?
The censoring and looking at the letters and stuff, was that a part of the headquarters job?
Yes, we had, I mean, as far as the where it was classified information or whatnot. Yeah, well, where if it's classified or secret or whatnot, yeah.
Your headquarters division of the all artillery, which battalions were y'all over?
Okay, we were, Division Artillery was over the 493rd, 494th, and 495th Field Artillery Battalions.
Okay. So, tell me, you had headquarters, and then tell me how it worked down to the platoons. Like headquarters was over, and then how did y'all communicate all the way down?
Okay, we had a colonel that was over our division artillery, and then a lieutenant colonel was over the three battalions, and then it was information passed out to them what was in order, and then they were responsible to us, and of course you want to know what in the battalions what the chain of command was, or what?
Yes.
Well, it was they had like I said, a lieutenant colonel as the and then a major, and usually the captains over the commanding different companies in the.
Okay, that's good. Okay, now let's get to New York and get to France.
Okay. We had a long ride from Texas to Camp Shanks, New York, and by train, and after we had a good ride over, it wasn't as, the seas were not as rough, and we were lucky. We were on a ship that fed 3 times a day. Now some of the British ships, they only fed twice a day, and
what was your ship? What ship were you on?
I cannot remember.
But was it an American ship then? It was
yes.
One of our ships. Okay, yeah.
But it was not too bad a trip over. We came in at Southampton. And we didn't do too much going over, except few would get out on deck, you know, for exercise and so forth. But it was not a bad trip over.
So when you got to Southampton, what was the headquarters job to? Did y'all oversee the equipment, and did you keep up with everything, like equipment, clothes issues, food, what all that was?
No, it was strictly personnel, mostly. Because they had a sergeant that was in charge of the equipment, you know, issuing of equipment, supply sergeant, in charge of that. So ours was strictly personnel, mostly personnel.
Okay, get me over to France.
Okay, we left out of England, Windmill Hill, Tidworth Barracks there in Windmill Hill, and went over to France and came in at Le Havre. And the first thing I remember, I saw a little French teenager, 10 or 12-year-old boy, and I asked him what time was, and he spoke perfect English. He says, 11 o'clock. And it's 11th day of November at 11 o'clock when we got off the LST there at Le Havre.
Tell me what it was like for you when you got to Le Havre, and if you remember how you felt. You'd been training all this time and now you were in France. Can you think back and tell me impressions and how you felt getting feet in Europe?
Well, it was a scary feeling because we know that before it was all play, and it was for real when we got to France. And we'd already heard what had happened at Normandy and so forth, so the lives had been lost, so we knew it could be us, and just anticipate, take precautions, and hope everything would work out all right.
Was that easy to do? I mean, was that easy for you to kind of go day by day knowing the things that, not knowing what you were going to face that day?
Well, it wasn't easy, but try to keep so busy until you forget about a lot of it. And it was quite an experience to go through that.
Is there one thing that you remembered the boy and the clock and it being 11 o'clock? What was the next thing that would stand out in your mind, whether it would be Le Havre or on up, or, you know, what picture do you see in your mind?
I remember the bitter cold that we went through, and I still have trouble keeping my feet warm because of wading through the snow and all that was we went through. And the accommodations were not, they got better, but in some places, because being in headquarters, we were a little farther behind, and we come into a town that had already been taken over. Well, we'd go ahead and requisition some places, if they had any places in the town that were not bombed out, to we could stay. So we were fortunate in that, being headquarters.
How many men were in headquarters with you?
A little better than 100 in the headquarters battery, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of men to
Right.
find places for. Wow.
Right.
Did you have to take all those personal records with you? What all did you have to load and carry?
Well, everything, the typewriters and all the records. Like I say, if there something happened to them, who would notify? You know, their in case of death or injury or so forth. And everything that you pick up out of an office, just about it, we could, except it was try to keep it dry. And it was lucky we never did have anything that was hurt, you know, that got damaged in any way. So.
Did were y'all ever in the situation where in y'all's headquarters where the enemy was coming at you, or were you always able to kind of stay back from that? Or were y'all ever caught in that situation where
we were close enough by we could hear some kind of the artillery coming in, and they said as long as you can hear it, you're all right. Those silent ones that, you know, if they're passing on over the sound, you're all right. But then we were close enough, we could hear that.
Tell me about the silent ones. I've never had anybody tell me about a silent one.
Well, the ones that it's like a plane flying over. You know, the sound is the plane's way here, and then you're looking up for it. You know, so it was when it gets there before you hear it.
Okay, so you're talking about airplanes and
well, I mean the artillery barrage, you know, shelling, whatnot.
Were you in with 100 men though? That would take a lot of space. Where were you and your men located in relation to the radio men and the contact out on the field and stuff?
Well, we had the transportation section within our outfit, and then we had the what they call a wire section, or the communications or message center, and of course they use wire for communication, strung it along the road there, so they would be out. As we'd move up, of course, they'd have to keep moving forward with the wire, and of course the radio. We had radio communication, but we had the radio section and air section. In the air section in our outfit, we had either 6 or 7 planes, and they were the major that was in charge of that was in our outfit too, headquarters, Major Gibbons. And we had the L4s, liaison plane they call it. They were used for spotters for the directed fire for the artillery.
Okay, now tell me the difference between the planes. There were those that were observers and radioed back.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So explain to me a little more about the difference in the plane situation.
Well, the L4, it was kind of like a Piper Cub, real small, and they would go up and they would spot the enemy or what they wanted to, and if they could direct the fire for the artillery where to go, left or right or over or under or whatnot, and they were either 6 or 7, I can't remember, in our outfit. But
and so y'all were over the pilots that made
right.
the Gibbons. Mm-hmm. Give me some impressions of him. What he was like as a commander.
I believe he was in either National Guard or Reserve or something. He came up through the ranks as he was still an enlisted man, I think, at heart, but because he'd come up through the ranks. But Major Givens. In Oklahoma, Enid, Oklahoma, I remember where it was, I remember that much about him. But he was a nice guy.
Was he a true military man? Was he one of those tough military people, or kind of like,
No.
I'm the leader, but we're kind of in this together?
No, he was not that. But Mr. Maurice Glover, he was one of the pilots too. That's was president last year and the year before, but he was one of the pilots. And I can't remember the others, but then I remember those two.
Was there a camaraderie feeling of when the pilots went up, or were you just so busy doing your own thing? How did y'all interact interpersonally there at headquarters, and as the pilots came in and out and all that?
Well, I didn't have any, you might say, any more or less communications with them mostly, because I was in the what we call the orderly room, or headquarters battery there with the first sergeant, and we more or less, like I say, took care of the personnel, and of course the first sergeant was over the whole enlisted group and directing them what to do in each section.
Tell me about communication. How did you get the word about wounded and those who were killed, and then what was your job in communicating information up the command until it finally got back to a family in the States?
Well, fortunately in my outfit we didn't lose any individuals, so we're very lucky there. But now some from another headquarters in another, they moved out the night before, and they were some, but then in our particular headquarters battery, we didn't lose any.
All the way through the war?
Right.
How many men was that? How many men was that you were over, that you took care of?
Well, over 100. It's about 125. So we were very fortunate. So.
Well, then, were some of them wounded? Did y'all have wounded?
No, we didn't have any wounded either, except by not by enemy fire anyway.
Okay. What kind of things happened to people if it wasn't any enemy fire? Was it just sick or accidents or?
Well, the injury from working, I mean, from tools, or like in a motor pool, get burned from exhaust or skin up or something from that.
Okay, where were you at Herlesheim, and what things do you remember about that?
Well, I remember after Herlesheim we were moving forward, and we could see the tanks see what happened, but we were far enough behind that we, know.
What were your impressions that day? What was it like for you to see all that?
Well, we know we were getting beat up real bad at that particular part of our travels through there.
What would have been from Herlesheim, where did y'all continue to go? Where's the next place that is really in your memory?
Around Colmar and Strasbourg, yeah.
What makes that stand out in your mind?
Well, I remember that we were told that the people there along there watch out because along that Alsace, Lorraine area that they were go with the flow. If you were German control or if you were French control, they were whatever who was in power, and to be real careful along that area.
Did you have much interaction with the local people?
No, we a lot of time we would our commanding officers and all would get with what they called burgomasters back then instead of mayor, and they would say, okay, we need some billets for so many people and a place to have headquarters if they had it, you know. So that was about all the communications we had with the local people.
Tell me the most unusual headquarters during the war. I mean, your location.
Well, we were in a area where that's during the war or after the war?
During the war.
During the war. Well, we stayed in some places there where we would stay in a building, and the houses were all up right close to the street, and we slept in on the hay in the barn. Our headquarters was in that housed in that area building, but it was cold, so that hay was warmer than the ground would have been outside. So lucky there.
Was there somebody in, what were headquarters, who was the serious one of headquarters that you worked with closely? What I'm getting at is, give me some personalities, you know, somebody who was the funny guy, kept everything loose, the real serious one, you know, those, your impressions of people that you worked with.
Well, the one I came in contact with a guy from Tyler or either Longview that was Carol Broderick. I think he's passed away since then, but he was real serious, nice fellow. We really appreciated him. He was in the communication section, so.
What about him made y'all respect him a lot?
Well, he was not too. He was rather quiet and easy to get along with, and so forth.
Now, who was the one that mixed it all up and was always the joke man?
Well, our first sergeant, he was quite a outgoing individual.
What was his name, and can you give me an example of a time that you can remember?
Well, his name was Sergeant Guion, and he was from St. Louis area, St. Louis, Missouri. And he was always joking, and he liked to participate in the drinking some. I don't know whether this would be correct or not, but anyway, that was.
We've heard a lot about drinking.
Oh, you have?
Yes, we
Oh,
have.
well.
I've had some real stories about drinking.
Yeah. I remember one particular town we were in that we were down in below street level, and there was a big barrels of whiskey and cognac and everything else down below, and you could hear the transportation, the vehicles going overhead, and they'd go down there and they would sample the everything. And one guy that was in another headquarters in our Combat Command A or Combat Command B, one of the others, And he said he got really inebriated. And I remember him crawling back up the stairs. He said, I've been in art galleries and museum, but I've never been in a place like this before. So it was quite a...
Did they use alcohol? What, did they drink so much because it was there, or why did they drink so much? Was it to escape, or what do you think that
probably
was?
Both. It probably availability and just check and see what each one tasted like.
Okay. If you were to close your eyes and think of all your experiences during the war, and you might have already told me this, but all the experiences in the war, what, if you close your eyes and you think about it, what is the picture that comes to you first?
Well, looking back from now, it seemed like it was a short time we were there. But when you take it day by day, it was a slow, when you think back, it was a slow process or time passed by, and it was anticipating or wondering what we were going to do the next day. We were going to have to pack up and move again, or we were going to stay there 2 or 3 days, or what. And it was quite an ordeal to pack and unpack every time we'd move up. And lack of communication with your people back home too. Not knowing how they were, being from a large family. And there was 5 of us. My brothers were in the same time in the service, and just before we went overseas, back up some, but one of my brothers had already passed away. He died at Camp Walters, Texas, and during training, first month of training. So, and then when we came back to one brother in the Panama Canal, he came home, and I had one that was on brother younger than I was, 15 years old. He had volunteered and went in the Navy, so he came in from the Atlantic off of a ship. And then I had one brother in Aleutian Islands came home, and I came home from Camp Barkley, and we all got there together. And of course we wondered what was happening to them after that. They're going back to their... So we anticipating, and I left my mother at home. Of course, my dad died in 1935, so left her at home. So anticipating the mail or communication. So
that would be a real stress. Was that very stressful on you, thinking about that in the midst of all what you were seeing? I mean, thinking about your brothers, that was a stressful thing also.
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At what point, your brother that died in Texas, was that just an accident there on the base?
No, he was, went in, he's 38 years old. He had asthma real bad, and the training that got him, so pneumonia and asthma.
I'm kind of jumping around, but
I am too.
we're on this family deal. Well, that's okay. We can get
cut
anything we want. Yeah, if we go in and we take what we need, the information. How does a mother deal with that? How was your mother when you got back? How did that affect her, or what kind of woman was able to deal with all this, with all of her boys gone?
Well, she was had already been a widow for 5 or 6 years when this happened, and she must have been strong to going through all of it. And also, I had another brother that was in the Korean and war, so there's six of us in all told during, well, right after. So it's all of us were single except one. So
How long did it take mail to get to y'all? Nobody's ever told me, I don't think.
well, sometimes it'd be a couple of weeks or a month, and then again it would be earlier. It's according to, I guess, how the ships are, how the mail, you know, how, what kind of situation we were in, where we were in a kind of a holding area, or because sometimes we'd move up and we'd stay and regroup, and you know, and then move up, and it's according to where we were on the move or where we were more or less regrouping, reassembling our.
When you reassembled and everything, did everybody come back to headquarters and kind of regroup? Come back to y'all?
No, we were not.
They never came
Physically,
back that far?
no, we were not physically. We were scattered out all over, you might say. We were not physically, we were not that close.
When was the first time you realized that the war would be ending? But do you remember what that happened, what that was?
I remember we were moving forward and we were near Munich. And it was on about the 5th of May. And we could see the German soldiers out beside the road with their hands up, wanting you to pick them up and give them something to eat, really. They just want to surrender. I remember that. And then May the 8th, I think it was when the war was declared officially over. But everything was moving so fast till at that particular time, so they were out waiting for somebody to pick them up because it was cold and they were hungry.
The push across Germany, were y'all a part, was your headquarters a part of that push across Germany, the quick movement across, or did y'all stay in one location? Well,
no, we were moving because like we were in the 7th Army, you know, with Patch, and then we were loaned out to General Patton, you know, for the Battle of the Bulge there. We went up there. So we were on the move during that time.
What location were you at? What was the longest amount of days that you were in one location? Do you remember that? May not be important.
Probably 3 or 4 days, I would imagine.
So tell me about the end of the war and what you did as you finished up your military experience.
Well, after May the 8th or along there, we began to regroup or get back together, and they began to count up the points to see if you were eligible to go home. And they went ahead and deactivated the 12th, and I was sent to the 6th Corps Artillery because I didn't have enough, had been there long enough points overseas and at home too. And I went to the 6th Corps Artillery headquarters.
Where was that located at? Where did you end up going?
Heidenheim, I believe it was. I have a list of it I should have brought with me. Because different, where we were at different places.
Tell me about what you did. What was it? The same job, and just kind of move me on through until when you got enough points.
Well, we stayed there from May until the following 1st of March, before we came on back home to by ship, and it was a rough, because a lot of them got sick and never ate the whole trip. Some of them had to go to this dispensary and have IVs because they couldn't eat, couldn't. So it was a rough ride coming back. Storm. So.
Tell me about the deactivation. What were you still in charge of the personnel, or what did you do in the headquarters in Heidenheim?
Well, until we didn't stay there the whole time, but I mean that was part of the time. But we still, until we left there and got ready to board ship, come back. Well, we had all the records together, but after then, well, I never did. Everything was taken care of from some other headquarters that took care of all the records from then, because we were, even though we all came back to New York on board ship, well, they had our records and we didn't do any more communications as far as records are concerned after that.
So what did you do when you moved over from the 12th? I'm trying to figure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what your job was. If you didn't do the records, then what?
Well, no, from the 12th, we went to the 6th Corps Artillery. Well, I was still into headquarters, battery, 6th Corps Artillery. It was still took care of records and all.
Tell me about the end of. Now you left the military right after the war, right?
Right.
Okay. Tell me about getting back to the U.S., getting home, that journey back, and about getting home.
Okay. Well, we came into New York and got off board and came into Camp Shanks, New York, and in 4 days we went to camp in Georgia, at Columbus. Can't think of but anyway, in 4 days I was home after that. Well, I got back to as far as Dothan, Alabama, after I left the Army, after I was discharged. Got back to Dothan and then went from there to my Geneva, Alabama. And then, of course, they didn't have any taxis or anything. They just didn't have but two, and they were, the guys were sick. And so it was 6 miles home, so I walked home with a suitcase. So it was quite an event, but I was ready to go home.
Short of 6 miles, huh?
Yeah.
Was it short or long?
It was at dark. It was dark too, after night. So.
Did your mom know when you were coming, or was
No.
it a surprise?
Surprise.
Tell me about that, if you don't mind.
No telephones, you know.
Okay. Can you tell me? Would you mind telling me about that? When what you felt as you were getting home, and the reunion and stuff like that?
Well, when well, I was happy to be home, and they were happy that I got back, because two of my other brothers had already gotten home and discharged. So, but they were scattered, you know. But of quite a homecoming for us. But
What did you do after that? What has your career been?
well, I came back to work for civil service at the Naval Air Station at Pensacola. So overhaul and repair of aircraft, and I worked in personnel after I got back for a while because I had experience in that in the service and all, and I was in that for a while, and they said, well, says my head supervisor says, well, why don't you get into the apprentice program for either aircraft instruments or engines or electronics or something. And I said, well, I probably don't want that. But he said, well, go ahead and put in for it anyway. So I put in for it. Well, in 4 weeks, it came up and they accepted me, and I went into the apprentice program. It was a 4-year apprentice program where you go to school 1 week and then you're in the shop for 3 weeks. So I went through that and got through the apprentice program and stayed in the shop in our aircraft instruments, what we worked on, and stayed in that for a short period of time, and then went from that to quality assurance and stayed in that for a few years, and then got out of quality assurance and went to planning and stayed about 10 years where I retired as a planner and estimator.
What's a planner and an estimator?
Well, it's we schedule aircraft instruments in our particular area to be overhauled by the shop, and then they repaired them, and then we put them back in supply or back in stock to be drawn out as was needed for aircraft.
And this again was with the Navy aircraft, right?
Right. And then I had contracts with the T-2 aircraft that they were using in Venezuela. I had a contract with them, and then I had a contract with some in Australia, New Zealand. I had contract with that, and then we had, when Shaw was still over in Iran, I had the contract with them for some aircraft parts for them to supply the planes that we had gave them, sold them. So we're in support of that aircraft. So.
How's the 12th Association? What has that meant to you, 12th Formative Association?
Well. And
what year did you find out about them?
I found out about it in February before St. Louis. It's about 4 years ago, because we lived on a route to Geneva, Alabama was our address at the when the last thing they knew of me was route to Geneva, Alabama. So I imagine that it got thrown in around circular files somewhere, any communications that might have come out of that. And then since the 12th, when it came back from left Europe, and deactivated, see, it left us in Europe, so we were not. If we'd have been part of that group, we'd have probably had more communications. But I got a letter from Maurice Glover that says, I hear you are part of the 12th. Would you like to join? Send us $10 and we'll send you a magazine once a month and so forth. And I joined up, and I went to St. Louis, and then went to Washington, and then went to Columbus, and I'm here. So I've been with the group, and I had not associated with anyone, communicated with anyone since I left. So I've lost a lot that if I had been talking about it for the last 50 years, well, I'd have.
Do you remember a lot of the men? Have you ended up reconnecting with some of the men that you were with in Europe?
Right. I had some pictures of the people, and when the first reunion, I I could pick them out. I mean, they hadn't changed that much. Now some of them had, but I mean, and Major Morgan, he was colonel. I mean, a captain back then, but Major Morgan. I remember he was he was a S3 officer, which is operations. S3 is operations. He was S3 officer, and he was. I remember he was from Selma, Alabama, near Montgomery. And when I met him in St. Louis, I mean, I saw him, and it was just as I hadn't seen him in 50 years, but it was just real. And the others that we've met, and I could recognize them from the pictures I had back then. They hadn't changed a whole lot, except got grayer and less hair and so forth.
Yeah. Do you think it's been a positive thing as you've listened to the men talk that have been here since, I guess, the beginning? Do you think the association serves a real purpose? Or
I do, yeah. You learn to, and with the group that we went to Germany with and just got back, well, we learned to appreciate them, and you know, got acquainted with them after staying with them for a couple of weeks over there.
So y'all took the trip just this spring? Did you
In
go
May.
in
May.
Oh. Were there things you remember? Did you recognize places, or had it changed so much?
One place is all that was after the war that I recognized while I was in the 6th Corps. Yeah. And we got pictures of that, and it resembles it a lot from what it was then, where we're in a sluice, where the whole go in one big gate, and you almost a circle around, and that's the only way you get in and out is through that, and it was still there.
We've talked about a lot of things. Is there some area that I have missed? Since I haven't talked to many headquarters people and haven't read much about headquarters, I'm sure it's out there, but I haven't come across it. Are there aspects of headquarters that I have missed that you would like to share with us?
I don't know of any, but except I know that as far as an individual to the others, I was not in close contact with a lot of people, like in the communications section or the motor pool section or the others, because I was doing my thing from administrative, from a paperwork standpoint, and I knew them by name, and when I would make out the payroll, I knew some of them I knew their home address by memory and all that, you know, that because you had to put all that, their full name and their serial number and all, and their deductions where they had insurance or they had deductions for their family. You know, you pay $22 and then the government pays the other, where you send home $50 a month, you know, or they get an allowance for their widow or their mother or something.
Was that something that the men chose to do, or was that?
Right.
Okay. You're the man I need to talk to. Tell me what the pay schedule was. Can you tell me that, kind of what the pay from top to bottom was? Maybe start with the private and go over.
Private was $50 a month.
And then they chose, what kind of insurance did they get?
Well, National Service Life was the insurance, and at the time, for my age, it was $6.40 a month.
So that was life insurance coverage?
Yes, I think it was $10,000, I believe. But and then some of them was $670 and so forth, as according to their age. And after you got out, you could keep that, or you could drop it. But some of them was skeptical about it, said, well, we don't want to keep it. I didn't keep mine, but some of them kept it. And then after a period of time, they got a dividend off of it. So they made out all right, but I didn't. I dropped mine when I got out. And I dropped everything associated with it. Associated with it. But they had the different, that was the main thing they had, was the insurance and the allotment for the dependents was the two of the main things that they had on the payroll.
Okay, so the private got 50, and then who got the next amount and on that?
I can't remember the amount. It's been.
Well, did they did they get raises like if you got first sergeant,
Oh yeah,
lieutenant?
sure, right.
Okay.
Well, you start off with the private, and then private first class, and then the corporal, and then the T5, which is a corporal stripes with a T on it. They usually is classified as technician, and then the T4, or either there's a 3 stripes with a T under it, or either sergeant, which is what we'll call buck sergeant, had 3 stripes, and then you had staff sergeant with 3 above and a rocker 1, and then the tech sergeant with 3 above and 2, and then the master sergeant with a 3 above and 3 below, and then the first sergeant with a diamond. They call it different now, I think, but it's that's what it was back then.
How did you keep up with things like in Herlesham and some of the stories I've heard? I mean, in a day you could go from a private to just depend on what had happened that day. How did you keep up with that?
Well, you might want to take this off record, but we had a individual that he had been out with the in the wire section, or the communications section, and he came in, and he was not, hadn't cleaned up. He'd been working. Captain says, what you'd been doing? He said, I've been working, Cap. So he says, well, how about getting cleaned up some, So he looked at the bulletin board. Somebody says, well, you just made PFC. So he went and looked on the bulletin board, and meanwhile somebody said the mail call. So they says, get the mail. And so he just went and read his mail, and the captain happened to see him again. So he got reduced back to all in one day. And of course I had to do the typing or promotion or demotion. So that was quite comical. But
did you pay what was the highest position that you paid? That you paid out. Did you pay all majors and lieutenant colonels and everybody?
No, the officers, they had a different, that took care of their records. Except the ones that were writing them, but the S1, S2, S3, and S4, which is operations, and S4 is supply, or S2 is intelligence, and so forth. They were paid from headquarters.
Okay, so what was the highest salary that you remember in the men you took care of?
I believe about $125, I believe it was.
And who was that for, the S4?
No, I mean for the enlisted.
Oh, okay.
No, that would be for the first sergeant or either master sergeant. We had one master sergeant and one first sergeant. And our master sergeant was later promoted. He got second lieutenant. Got commissioned. So.
Tell me what commission means. I keep hearing people talk about commissioned officer and stuff. Explain that so we'll know that someday.
Okay, the non-commissioned officers are those of enlisted men. from private, or they call them recruits now, but private back then, through master sergeant, first sergeant, or sergeant major back. So that would be your non-commissioned. We'll go through that.
So what got you into a commissioned officer position? Was it service, or was it years, or was it?
No, it would be through a battlefield commission, you know, where you going above and beyond the call of duty, I guess. So.
Could you give me some examples of that? Of someone you knew that got commissioned?
Well, the Sergeant Mason, he was a master sergeant, and he was the only one in headquarters that we got, I say, a battlefield commission, or while we were there.
Now, did you keep up with what got them in the battlefield commission, or you just got the word that he was a commissioned officer now?
No, we got the word that he was promoted from master sergeant to second lieutenant. Probably made more money as a master sergeant with a few years than he would as second lieutenant. Because some of the warrant officers, they had warrant officers, but we didn't have any in our outfit there.
Tell me what the warrant officer did.
Well, they were usually like in the higher echelon. They were like in the motor pool. They were in charge of, you know, the vehicles. They would be in charge of that. But they had the same privileges as an officer, but also as an enlisted man. They could
They could go back and forth, huh?
Right.
Okay. Is there anything I've missed? I really appreciate that information about the paying and how that all worked, because nobody had ever told me about that.
Well, it's as I think back, I wish I had back then I was so young, I didn't realize what was going on, and what, you know, the pain or agony through all that. But been a long time.
Do you have children?
I have two adopted children. We didn't have it for 9 years, so we adopted a boy and a girl, 2 years apart. They're 44 and 42 now, or will be in September. Well, September.
Okay. And when did you marry?
I married in 1947, July 1947.
And was it a hometown girl? What's your wife's name? And tell me how you met her.
Well, my brother, older than I was, introduced us to her, and she was from near home, and met her because his wife to be was boarding at my wife's parents' place, working at the cotton mill there in their hometown. So met her, and I dated her for a year, and then let her get out of high school, and then we married. We've been married 51 years this past July. And we have, last Tuesday, we went to the ceremony for our daughter adopted. She's foster mom, and she adopted one that she'd had since 2 days old. He's 3 years old now, so they got around to getting all the paperwork where they could adopt him. I don't know but she works full time and keeps 5 kids, so she must feel like it's a need because she was adopted. I don't know, and my son has one daughter. And my daughter has 2 older children, one a Marine in Japan, and then a daughter's first year in college. She's married though.
Okay. If there was something that you would want to leave or tell your grandkids and or your great grandchildren, is there something you would leave with them that you would want to tell them on our tape? Either about your experiences or about life or things you learned?
Well, our son would be more interested in as far as the military standpoint, because he was in the Navy for 4 years. But they wouldn't be as interested in some of the stuff as because since they're adopted and no history of there, I think. But he's more or less more interested in the military. I mean, he reads a lot. My daughter doesn't have time to read, except the kids.
How did your war experiences change you, or did you learn some things about yourself?
The war changed.
Mm-hmm. Did the war change you any, or did you learn some things about yourself that you hadn't known before that war experience?
It didn't. I don't drink, so I didn't have to get recovered from that, or whereas some of them do and have had to do. And I've always been associated with people older than I am, our friends, and so that makes it and my wife too. So even though she's 4 years older or younger than I am, better say older, but we've always associated with older people and more or less settled. We might later, but we haven't gone over the deep end. Always been quieter.
Well, is there anything that I've missed that you can think of? I want to make sure I haven't missed anything.
I believe that's spot on.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming so much today and giving us some more information. Okay. That was great.